And does your process come in a flow, or does it come in fragments that are assembled later?
Mostly in a flow, actually, Patrick. Yeah, not always, not always. Sometimes it would be fragmentary, or sometimes it wouldn't work at all. I mean, I'll be honest, you're not going to necessarily switch into it every time, and you have to be prepared to sort of accept that and maybe, you know, put some of the work away into a drawer for another time for reworking or binning or whatever. Yeah.
Thanks very much then.
Okay, no, thank you. Okay, anyone else?
There, Matthew, is it Vayl or Val?
Sorry?
There's one hand up there as well.
It's Vayl.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so I'm from the US. I'm wondering, what do you think about the place where surrealist poetry comes from? I write a lot of surrealist poetry that reads very much as surrealist poetry, but I'm a complex dreamer and I'm also neurodivergent. So a lot of my experiences, the way I experience the world, reads like surrealism to people when I write it literally. And what I found is that sometimes when I write in my own personal perceptions, I can come out with poetry that reads like very deep surrealism to most people, unless I give them a key to decipher it with. So it's kind of this interesting way of getting people to read it on several levels. But I don't know if it's really surrealism, if that's what it is.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't like to say what's really surrealism and what isn't, you know. I mean, if you know, I would just keep working at it, keep writing it, you know, let it flow. I mean, if it comes out in that form, try sending it out to surrealist magazines. I mean, there are plenty of them around, and see what happens. You know, you might find that surrealist magazines take the poems quicker than other magazines or journals. It may, you know, it's always hard when you're writing it, you know, to work out where your market is really, or where your readers are. So I would definitely have a look at that. I mean, if you feel your work it has elements of that, then send your work out there and you know, see what they say.
That's a very good idea. Thank you. I've had some success with regular journals, but I haven't thought to send specifically to surrealist journals. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't, you know, I don't see myself as solely surrealist at all in any way. It's just another aspect of, you know, my writing. And, you know, I don't feel we should, you know, feel that we have to be pigeonholed in one thing or another. You know, the poetry world is so broad and exciting and fun, you know, that we can go into surrealism, you know, in an afternoon, and then in the evening go somewhere else, you know. So I'd really encourage people to explore all avenues, and not to necessarily like stick writing the same thing over and over again, however successful you may be with it.
That's great advice. Generalissimo Bryan Franco has a question.
Yes. So this will probably be covered more in your workshop, but in defining it, because I don't know how to define the word surrealism outside of my knowledge of paintings, and so, you know, and I think of the difference between Dali and, let's say, Magritte, who were both surreal and were very different in their practice. So but I think about, you know, when someone tells me that a poem that I've read sounds surreal, and I take it as a very big compliment, but I don't necessarily understand, you know, there's this breadth of what that word means that I can't ever really put into words.
Yeah,
you know, well, I think of the dream state poem, the poem that sounds like it's a dream running together, things that are disparate that running together somehow, and I think of that as surreal. But I don't know how to, you know. And then there's also certain imagery that just sort of is very blurry that feels surreal. But I don't know how to describe the word itself in words, you know.
Yeah. I mean, as Sue has just put in the chat, you know, it's kind of beyond the real. It's a journey that goes beyond sort of reason and rationality, I suppose. Andre Breton called it thought in the absence of all control, exercised by reason. So it's an escape from that, an escape from the real, I suppose. But you know, there's lots of different ways of defining surrealism in poetic terms. We'll have a look at that in a minute, actually. We may as well, I think, move into the workshop scenario now, seeing as people are interested in that side of it. So I'll just give a little brief introduction of where surrealism comes from. Some of you will know this already, and some of you may not, so it might be useful. The actual term surrealism was coined by the French poet Apollinaire in 1917. So, but although he coined it then, the actual term didn't start really getting used properly until the 1920s, after the First World War. And it kind of partly arose out of Dada, which had already begun, which began during the war. Dada was very anti-art, and it developed because a lot of artists and writers, particularly in Paris, felt that there'd been an excessive rationality and bourgeois values in society, which had brought about the war, the First World War. So they wanted to escape that kind of rationality and that bourgeoisness. So that's where Dada came from. And Andre Breton and the others were very involved in that initially. But then in the 1920s, surrealism started to become more of a thing. And Andre Breton in particular wrote the Surrealist Manifesto in 1924, setting out his ideas and stressing, as I just mentioned, thought in the absence of control, exercised by reason as his definition. The difference between Dada and surrealism really is that what Dada was very much anti-art, but surrealism wasn't. You know, surrealism is very engaged with art, and also it also engaged with the work of Freud at the time. Freud had been writing about the importance of dream and dream analysis, and also free association and the unconscious. And the surrealists in the 1920s were really interested in this. And so they started to do things like write down their dreams and meet and exchange, like, you know, exchange what they dreamt the previous night or whatever. I'm sure they probably made it up half the time just to make it more interesting. Certainly none of my dreams would make it very far on the tables of Paris, I reckon. Yeah, except one, but we won't go down there at the moment. Okay, so they were very interested in Freud and, as I say, free association. And they wanted to kind of stretch language as well and explore the human psyche. So they didn't last that long really as a movement. Like a lot of these movements, they kind of burst on the scene and then kind of split, really. There was a big split in the surrealism movement in the 1920s. And they kind of faded away, but they never quite disappeared. They weren't wholly French either. It was, the thing about Paris at the time was it was a real place where lots of different cultures and different nationalities had met during the war and then in the aftermath of the war, and that really helped to create this really hyper active artistic scene. but of course, as I say, you know, when you get all those kind of people together and all those ideas, tensions were created, and really by only a few years after 1924, it was already kind of dissipating to a certain extent. Yeah, I mean, it does still sort of, certainly, it moved into film a lot, you know, when film was coming in the 20s as a really important medium. And so some of the surrealists moved into filmmaking and obviously into visual art as well, which had always been big. And the poets did tend to get kind of forgotten a little, although you know, there were plenty that carried on writing surrealist poetry. You know, there was an English poet called David Gascoigne who was writing right up until the 70s, 80s, I think, surrealist poetry, and I'm sure there are others. So I thought we might do an exercise, if you like, as part of this workshop, or maybe we might do.
I'm sorry, could you spell Gascoigne?
Yeah, Gascoyne.
Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no bother. He also, if you're interested in, he also wrote a really useful little book called A Short Survey of Surrealism. I actually have it right next to me. This book, and if you can get hold of that, that's a great little introduction to surrealism. He knew all the characters involved, Gascoigne. I mean, he lived in Paris for quite a long time, and that's a great book, well worth reading if you do want to take your interest further. So yeah, an exercise then. I thought we might do what's called a substitution poem. As I mentioned, there's loads of different exercises associated with surrealism. I'm going to mention a few. This is one of them. So a substitution poem involves, you take an existing poem. It could be one of your own. It could be somebody else's. It might not even be a poem. You could use a newspaper article, for instance. You could use a technical manual. You could. I realized I just showed my age by saying newspaper article. You could use a travel guide, anything you like, really, as material for this. So what you need to do then is once you've got your text, you don't go overboard. Don't try and do a whole book or anything. Just a page is all you need. Maybe not even that if it's very dense prose. And what you do then is you pick out on each line. If it's a poem, it's a lot easier. On each line, pick out a verb or an adjective or an adverb or a noun, and underline them. Just go through it and underline at least one of those on each line. Okay, and once you've underlined that, this is, so you don't need to do it immediately. I'm just telling you, I'll give you a few minutes to work on this in a minute. Okay, so once you've underlined them, you then go back and using a dictionary, you replace each of those underlined words with a random word from the dictionary. Okay. So, as I said, it's a substitution poem. You're substituting the words that a word from the poem from each line with a new word. Okay, so it will create a completely new poem. So that is the basic challenge. You don't have to use a dictionary. You can use another piece of text and just open it randomly and just pick a word. The main thing is, you're not selecting it with your brain, you're selecting it completely randomly. If you're selecting it with your brain, then it's not really, you know, surrealist, okay? Okay, does that make sense? And if it doesn't, blame the surrealists, not me. Okay, so shall I give you 10 minutes to come up with something? Is that plenty of time, too long? Anyone, any feelings? No. Catherine says good, so we're all good.
Can it be any piece of writing, did you say? Yeah.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that can be part of the fun. You can find a poem in you know, in almost anything if you look hard enough.
And the verb, the adjectives, the nouns, we're literally changing.
Yeah, you don't have to change all of them, Ruth. You can just go through it first and pick out ones, and then that you're going to change, and then you change them with the random process. Okay, you can change every single one of them if you want, Ruth.
Right.
It's madness. Okay.
As well as that, if anyone has a finished item ready to read, if you put your name into the chat, I'll take them down in the order in which they're put in, and you can feel free to read them for Matthew to comment on or rate or whatever.
Oh, I won't be rating them.
Okay, I suspect they'll be fun anyway.
Yeah. Have people had enough time?
I have one name anyway. Mitzie is ready to read.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah, I think most people are, I mean, it's an exercise you can carry on anyway. It's not one you necessarily have to finish now. I just thought I meant to read out an example, but nobody seemed to need one. But I'll read out an example anyway. I stole this shamelessly off the internet. It took a poem by Christina Rossetti called Is the Moon Tired? So I'll read the Rossetti version first, and then I'll read the Substitution Poem afterwards. It gives you an idea of how it can go, although you're probably already finding that out. So the Rossetti poem, it goes, Is the moon tired? Is the moon tired? She looks so pale within her misty veil. She scales the sky from east to west and takes no rest. Before the coming of the night, the moon shows papery white. Before the dawning of the day, she fades away. And then the Substitution poem is the ink tired? She looks so careless with her misty smile. She chronicles the sky from society to story and takes no camera. Before the rate of the water, the moon shows tedious representative. Before the innovate of the detail, she rally away. Okay, so you get the idea there. And so it sounds like a few people have managed to get something written anyway. Is there anyone who would like to read out?
Mitzie,
I'll
do you
go.
want-
Yeah, I'll go there. The poem was by Lillian Roberts Findlay. And will I read the few lines? I've just done a few lines. Will I read the first few lines of the original poem?
Yeah, do.
I nudged you awake at dawn. It's called The Firstborn. I nudged you awake at dawn. It's happening, I said. You leaped out of bed still asleep and hit the floor, and I began to laugh. I remember how you swore, you dropped your watch. The more you panicked, the more I laughed. I lay there laughing in between the minutes. Now, I probably didn't do it right because anyway, I nudged you cigars at dawn. It's happening, I said. You leaped out of bed, still myself. You hit the floor, and I inward to laugh. I remember how you swore, you drunk your watch. The more you panicked, the more I laughed. I lay there laughing and screamed the minutes.
Very good. That's yeah, works well, I think, Mitzie.
It's definitely unconscious anyway.
Yeah. No, did you use a dictionary, or what did you use?
No, I used the poem. I have a load of poems that I cut out of books ages ago, and I used Gabriel Burns. I just took a page out of this to substitute words.
Brilliant.
That's what I had to hand. Yeah, it's very enjoyable. Thanks, Matthew.
Not at all. And I like the idea that you've been cutting out poems. I mean, do you ever think of collaging them? Because that is that's a surrealist technique.
Yeah, and I have done blackout poems as well. I've very into that. So yeah, and the poems I just cut out because I've loads of, there was old books, lifelines they were called here in Ireland for poets. So I didn't want to throw them out, even though, and there was no bookshops open, so I cut out a load of poems, or no secondhand shops open, so I just cut them all out. I'm glad I did now. They're brilliant to have and to play around with.
Great idea. Yeah. Okay.
I actually have a list. The next one is Catherine.
Okay, Catherine.
I took my own poem called Cider Santa, and I changed him to Chocolate Santa. Yeah. Well, do you want me to read the original and then the substitute, or I'll just read the substitute?
How long are the two poems?
12 lines, 12 short lines.
Okay, 12 short lines is fine. Yeah, go for it, Catherine.
Okay, I'll give the original Cider Santa though. So Cider Santa. I see him most days outside City Hall, advertising homelessness, lonesomeness, clutching his golden future, everybody's friend, one more swig before kissing the streets again. Cider Santa, how do you find yourself here, so far from Lapland? That's the original. So, Chocolate Santa. I stalk him most days inside City Hall, advertising muffins, whistling Dixie, flinging his golden apples, nobody's friend, one more swagger before eating the streets again. Chocolate Santa, how do you find cocoa to reinvent yourself when the world is full of tongues that want to lick you?
Very good, Catherine. Excellent.
I have so far now I have 6 more. The next one is Susanna.
Okay, so I just grabbed randomly the Lieutenant of Inishmore.
Oh yeah.
So just 5 lines from it. So I read it first. Christy, did I tell you how I picked up the fat fella with his sister, saying it was him killed the cat? I said, the Jesuits say you should never tell a lie, boy. So I left to tell the truth on that subject, haha. Except it isn't the Jesuits who say that at all. Is it not? Who is then? I don't know, but it isn't the Jesuits. So then I grabbed the mammoth of jokes, and that's what came out. Did I tell you how I whispered up that fat fella? His sister saying it was him gambling the cat? I said, the Jesuits say you should never tell an Icelandic bank boy. I left to tell the cocktail on that subject, except it isn't the Jesuits who Michael at all. Is it not? Shoppers, is it then? I don't know, but it isn't the Flintstones. So, yeah.
Great, very good, Susanna.
Next one is Ada.
Okay, I took a little bit from the conclusion of The Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb, and the original sounds. I glanced at the manuscript with a feeling of calm elation. Every sentence in the book was a derivation, an application, or an interpretation of the short maxim. Some details and extensions can be counterintuitive and elaborate, particularly when it comes to decision-making under opacity, but at the end, everything flows from it. And reworked replacement poem is, I glanced at the manuscript with a feeling of calm contraction. Every read in the jive was a derivation, an application, or an interpretation of the short maxim. Some vegetables and worries can be counterintuitive and elaborate, particularly when it comes to ego making under opacity, but at the end, everything flows from it.
Very good. Ada, what did you use as to generate the random words there?
I just followed your advice. I have an offline application, like an English to English dictionary with elaborate everything, and I just typed the random letters and the word list. I browsed the word list and if anything, sometimes I had to retype because it would be gibberish and didn't recognize the words at all.
Yeah.
So just randomly banged at the keyboard and.
But there are lots of things to generate random words online, and there even used there did used to be a random poem generator, I think, which always seemed to me a great idea. Okay, anyone else? Who else, Margaret?
The next one is the founder of DeBarra's spoken word, Nick Smith.
Stop. I was lucky to find a Rilke 30 collected poems, and this is the group. It's just 4 lines, which is very handy because I found it quite daunting getting the replacements. Anyway, it's like someone quickly picking for a bouquet. Chance hastily arranges the faces, loosens them up and pushes them closer again, takes 2 far ones, discards a near one. And the words I changed, it then changes to, like someone mechanical picking for a bouquet, chance, overbitten, arranges the face, loosens them up and pushes them heathen again, takes 2 far ones, certifies a near one.
Interesting. How did you choose? How did you choose those words, Nick?
That was from. I've got a very small book here. It's a dictionary.
Oh yeah.
So it was a bit. It was almost maybe too random because you flick it open. Anyway, an interesting experience.
Yeah. Very brave to be rewriting Rilke.
beginner's license, I think they could call it.
The next one I have is Patrick Close. Patrick, are you somewhere? I can't see him in room.
I'm here, yes. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I took a tax information slip that was here because it's tax time in Canada, and I just let the words arise. I didn't have a random word generator of anything. The title of this was Getting the Right Benefits at the Right Time, and I retitled it to There Are No Benefits to the Right. And the adjusted words go as follows. Promptly tell your subconscious when. 1, you leave this room for more than 6 months. 2, your hereditary information changes. 3, your mental state changes. 4, a thought who is under 18 is obligated to receive the benefit, entering or leaving your custody. No one, and the last one, no one receives the benefit.
So how did you approach that then if you didn't use a second text?
Well, I'm a painter as well as a poet, and I'm experimenting with autonomic painting, where you simply put the brush to the canvas and let things happen. So I just let the words arise. I didn't have a randomizing source to at hand. So as I was looking at it, words arose, and I just put them in.
Okay, so you didn't find it problematic that you were consciously involved in the writing? You managed to get into a state where you just let the words come?
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah.
I'm quite familiar with unconscious states.
Sure. Yeah. Good. Well done, Patrick. That was good.
Now, next I have Cathal. Tony.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, interesting concept. It still reminds me of seeing a documentary one time with David Bowie, and he suggested the way he wrote his lyrics sometimes was to just write words on a piece of paper, then cut the paper up with a scissors and have individual words on little strips of paper and toss them up in the air, let them fall on the ground, and then he just picked them up as he found them, and he used that to create lyrics for his songs. So this sounds kind of familiar, kind of similar to that. Well, listen, all I did really here was to just randomly pick out words as I hit them from one of my poems and just stuck them up. And then I just, as the previous speaker said, I just let words come to me and just stuck them on the page. I didn't actually think about what the word would be. It was just, there was no association between the replacement word and the word that was there. It was just whatever hit my head at the time. So I assume that's what you're talking about, Matthew, is it? Is poem to what you're talking about?
Yeah. I think the important thing is people find their own ways into these, and so whatever works really.
Well, I didn't have a dictionary handy, so I just threw it up there. Basically, it was basically just throwing words in a page, and there was no link between them.
Yeah.
So the initial words are somehow the color of happiness can be found in a basement unwanted, with acceptance of crippled heart. There can be no review to follow, only cold space. Sounds nice, just a series of words. And I just replaced it with plainism is part of our culture, black vision, boring, brutal, a blue harvest before the revolution as autumn leaves fall brown. That's it. Just threw it there.
Yeah, no.
I like it. I like the idea of doing stuff. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it opens up possibilities in writing. I mean, you don't always, from these kind of exercises, I find, you don't always necessarily get something like a whole poem that you can use, but quite often you might get some really striking lines or ideas or images that even if the poem doesn't turn out quite how you wanted, you might get a line or two that you think, yeah, I can work with that. I can take that somewhere else, or I can use that in my next poem or my next piece of writing. So it's really handy, I think. I mean, these exercises are really about kind of opening your mind a little bit to new possibilities in poetry. I think we can all get a little bit kind of stuck in our ways, and it's really important every so often to look at different ways of writing a poem, and to realize that there are so many different ways. Yeah, Margaret, was there anyone else?
Yeah, I have two more. Pam is next.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Sorry, my connection's a little bad, so I can't show my face.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, I took a poem that I've written that I'm having problems with, and it's 9 lines. If I could read that first, and then I used a children's book called A Wolf Called Wander, and I just opened a page and put a finger down, and I replaced either a noun or a verb with it. Okay. So the original is, allow me to wander with you the Tolkien way, the shadows of dimmed eyes and muted voice, in search of firefly light, splinters of a traded tangibility. Allow me to wander with you, injured stone by injured stone, our lens sparkled glint of knife edge into waters divisible by human hands. Allow me to wander with you in murky depths, to sieve suspicion, fear, and pain. Empty lungs, strain, rise to the light, weathered waters hold. Okay, now this is the version with the replaced words. Listen with you the token way, the shadows of dimmed eyes and muted song, in search of firefly light, splinters of a traded howl. Allow me to wander with you, huffing stone by huffing stone. Our lens jump spin glint of knife edge into waters divisible by journey's hands. Allow me to wander with you in murky teeth to sieve suspicion, fear, pain, empty lungs strain, tricks to the light, weathered waters blow. So it came out a little differently.
Yeah, it certainly did. Yeah, it certainly did. I mean, the way it came out, do you think you could use any of that or even all of it?
Yes, I think it's opened a way to make it less abstract and put a little more emotion in it.
Okay.
Like teeth to me has a lot more emotion than, what was the word I used? Depths. So yeah, I may do it with more words because my lines were kind of long. So just to choose one word, maybe I should have, or I could experiment with choosing more than one word.
Absolutely, yeah, no, I mean, really let go and see where it takes you. I mean, you can always go back to your original poem anyway, so you're not losing anything. You may as well see how far you can take this exercise, I think.
Okay. The ones that made me laugh are the ones that actually opened my vision to the poem. But I was surprised by it.
Yeah.
No, I have 3 people are adding their names, so it's great. Mags, and after you, there's Bryan, and then Vayl. So Mags.
I won't delay. So I suppose everything about me is spontaneous and free verse and very kind of surreal when I write and I do my art, when I write music as well. So I've never any formal constraints. I need maybe a bit of discipline. So I just took, we were reading last night, we heard last night, Lawrence McKeown. I was quite shocked how beautiful his book is. The deity, trademark studded athletic garb, as yet unconvinced, walked circles of its own shadow. Talk was of forecasts often detailed, long and short range, always the obligatory touch of cynicism. That's when he was in prison, actually. And I wrote, just did a complete random thing off the dictionary.
Yeah.
Fracture manned, archaic mammoth, as yet uncontrasted, contemplated the foyer of its own holding, misgivings of persuasion, often muted, relieved and unorthodox prints, always the unsavory touch of reflection. I kind of like that.
Yeah, it's really nice actually, Max. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the dictionary. No, I never did that, and thanks for that.
No, I mean, it's, you know, like sometimes people get stuck, you know, like writers talk about writer's block, but, you know, that's the whole point of exercises like this. You know, once you've got these kind of exercises, you can always write something. Okay, Mark.
And the Vayl 5-word challenge is like absolutely the most amazing thing, because you throw up all sorts of ideas and you find all sorts of characters. Basically, you know, we're doing it for years, so it's a great old surreal exercise.
There's our winner. Matthew Maggs was our winner last Monday, so she's well versed in spontaneity.
Yeah.
Now I must apologise, I wasn't paying attention to people who had raised hands. So I have 4 people left, and anyone that didn't already read, please feel free. Generalissimo Bryan is next.
Okay, well, I had a cereal box, so I just took the, I'm gonna read the, this little paragraph of copy from the back of the cereal box. It says, it's this brand called Kind, which started off as a brand of fruit and nut bars, and then they expanded into granolas and cereals and other things. Do the kind thing for your body, your taste buds, and your world. Welcome to the Kind community. Here at Kind, we think a little differently. Instead of or, we say and. We choose healthy and tasty, convenient and wholesome, economically sustainable and socially impactful. From the snacks and foods we make to the way we work, live, and give back, our goal is to make Kind not just a brand, but also a state of mind and community to make the world a little kinder. And then I took this and, oh, here it is. It says, do the kind thing for your existence, taste for life and your vision. Welcome to the Kind alternative universe. Here at Kind, we think a little outside the lines. Instead of or, we say go your own way. We choose healthy and trustworthy, convenient and timeless, economically sustainable and socially unconventional. From the philosophy and attitudes we desire to the way we work, live, and give too much time, our goal is to make Kind not just an iconic concept, but a state of exceptional and acceptance, to make the world a little less mean. I didn't have anything to use as a source for the words. I just kind of just thought, take away the food and make it into, instead of the brand Kind, the word Kind as an alternative universe.
Sure, yeah. No, I like the idea of using a cereal packet. I think all cereal packets should have surrealist poems on them. It would make life much more fun.
Well, I wish I had Fruit Loops, but you know, Toucan and Sam, you know.
Yeah. Margaret?
Next, I have Vayl.
Hello. The first paragraph of the first chapter of the Book of the New Sun, which is a book by Gene Wolfe. And the first paragraph is, the chapter is called Resurrection and Death. And the first paragraph is, it is possible I already had some presentiment of my future. The locked and rusted gate that stood before us, with wisps of river fog threading its spikes like the mountain paths, remains in my mind now as the symbol of my exile. That is why I have begun this account of it with the aftermath of our swim, in which I, the torturer's apprentice Severian, had so nearly drowned. And I used a random word generator, and random word generator came up with the same noun as was already in it, the word lake, which is hysterical because the word lake is possibly the most significant word in that sentence other than the name Severian. So right. Foreshadowing in my surrealism. Okay. It is possible I had some presentiment of my science, the measly and rusted lake with security of weakness threading its spikes like the mountain uncles, remains in my mind now as the advice of my exile. That is why I have begun this philosophy of it with the aftermath of our chew, in which I, the lake's apprentice Severian, had so nearly drowned.
Yeah, that's so weird that the word lake came up for you. It's really strange. Like you say, it's a key word, isn't there?
It's very strange. And it was such a coincidence that in terms of the context of the novel, it's a very significant word.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you want to say something instead of reading a poem?
Okay, yeah, I think what I chose was just too long. I took a book that was I took the whole page of, and it's about Godin. But it's so randomly. Then I did the words, and found dictionary words, but I didn't actually pay attention to the word classes. So that it's like, yeah, I don't think it's good. It would be very long to read, and it would be just yeah. I wasn't aware that you have to kind of match the word classes. Yeah, so that's the kind of just I'm pulling out of actually performing this or presenting this, but thanks for all the reminders, and yeah, there's a lot that I'm already familiar with that just needed to be jogged in my memory, literally, so thanks a million.
Sure.
The final reader I have down here is Ruth.
Hi, I'm so surprised that all of you are reading so fastly. I can't read a page at the moment. So I have gone back to my own memory and went straight back to Wordsworth. I wandered lonely as a cloud. So I chose the verbs and nouns to replace. And I used a word generator because my diction was down in the living room and I couldn't get there in time. So anyway, I just kind of started with, I sacrificed, I presume you all know the poem I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, so I'm not going to do them. And I've only done the first verse because there's no point in going further than that. But I sacrificed lonely as a screw that shrinks on high on food and lift, when all at once I orbit a nest, a default of golden hemispheres, beside the hurt beneath the district, stationed and truth in chemistry.
That's great. Actually, it's quite a good idea to use something that's well known, because that way people can relate to it in a different way. They're kind of more surprised really by the words that appear than if it's a poem or a piece of work that they don't know. So that's a really good idea, Ruth. Actually, it works well. Okay, Margaret, is that
that concludes our participants?
Yeah. I mean, just before we close up, I thought on this side of it, I thought I'd mention a few more exercises just for those of you who might be interested. One of the things that you can do, for instance, is an alphabet poem, which is pretty much as it sounds. You begin, so you write a poem where each word begins with the letters of the alphabet in sequence. So for instance, all brave computers dive, eat fish, grow hair, and then you can just keep going on until you get to Z, and then you can go back again from Z back to A if you like. You can also then unscramble the letters afterwards, you know, like change the order around. So that's an alphabet poem. They're good fun to do, actually. And again, you know, you sometimes get something that really works out of it, because, you know, you're really forced into a corner when you have to think of a word that you know, begins with a particular letter. We talked a little bit about automatic writing, where, I mean, this is, as I said, where surrealist poetry really began. And you do, as Patrick was saying, you have to find a way to open yourself to a state of receptiveness, and write down what comes into your head. There's one bit of advice I read somewhere, that if you get stuck, start a word with the last letter of the word that you got stuck on. So, you know, it's it's just a simple little thing to help you keep moving, to stop to stop yourself getting too stuck on a phrase or a word. It's often recommended that with these kind of exercises, the automatic writing, that you put yourself into a very quiet environment, i.e. probably not your home. A darkened room particularly is useful when your kids are at school or whatever. Music is very helpful, but not music with lyrics, music, and background music. Focus on the act of writing rather than what you're writing. So really just focus on keeping the pen moving. And then afterwards, when you're looking at the, looking back over the work, look for patterns in it. I mean, you don't have to sort of rewrite it, but it can be useful to look back at it and find patterns or strong descriptions that you can use, or maybe elements of a story or a character that maybe you feel, okay, that's the beginning of something else. As I said earlier, these surrealist exercises don't always end up as surrealist poems. They can do, but they sometimes end up as poems in their own right, traditional poems. They sometimes end up as stories. They might end up as something else altogether. But the point is, they're great ways into writing. Another famous exercise, probably most of you have heard of, is the Exquisite Corpse, very famous surrealist exercise, where basically, it's a bit like Chinese whispers. A poet would write a line, well, the first poet would write 2 lines, fold the piece of paper down so the next poet can only see 1 line, and then they write on and fold the piece of paper down. So you only ever see the preceding line. You don't know what the rest of the poem is about. And that's a great way of producing an unexpected poem. Obviously, you need a group unless you have multiple personalities. But you do, ideally, you need a group for that. But it's great fun. You can have, often what you do is you would have a sentence like the something, 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 the something, something. Okay, I know that doesn't make any sense at all, but in my head it made sense. Okay, I'll give an example. The fat man slowly swam the polluted puddle. Okay, so you've got an adjective, a noun, an adverb, a verb, and an adjective and a noun. Okay, we're overthinking it here, but that's Exquisite Corpse anyway. It's a real party game. Get the family involved, have a glass of wine and play Exquisite Corpse. The other another game you can use is a letter game, whereby you choose a particular letter and you begin every line of the poem with that letter. That's quite a good challenge. Another one is the Misheard Poem. This is a bit different in the sense that you're relying on listening into people's conversations, things you've heard, but you've overheard wrong. Or it could be song lyrics that you got completely wrong, like this is the dawning of the age of malaria, was one I read. Another one was another one fights the dust. Like, lots of us hear song lyrics completely wrong, but it's a great way of getting into a poem. You can do a whole poem on misheard song lyrics or misheard conversations. And then just the last thing I thought I'd mention just before that, and this is the last thing, is the Oulipo writers. Oulipo was a movement in France, not strictly surrealist really, but a kind of offshoot, I suppose you could argue. Particularly appeals to writers who are also mathematicians. Okay, I don't see anyone putting their hand up there, but sometimes there are writers who are interested in numbers and mathematics in some way. So So for instance, the famous Oulipo writer was Georges Perec. He wrote a book called Avoid, A and then Void, in which, and it's a big book as well, it's a novel. He doesn't use the letter E in the entire book. That's called a lipogram. And actually there was an Irish novel out last year called Una by Alice Lyons, which does the same thing. She doesn't use the letter O apart from in the title in the book. So these are constraints. I mean, a lot of the surrealists was about freeing yourself up. The Oulipo is slightly different. It's writing under a constraint or constraints, but it's a kind of progression on from surrealism. So I just thought I'd mention that at the end, just in case we have a number of mathematicians in the house, but it doesn't look like we do. Right, okay, so I think that's everything I wanted to say. Yeah, I'll hand you back to Margaret anyway. So thanks very much. Hope you enjoyed the workshop. There's more exercises, as I say, that you could do. Sorry, just before I finish, I had another idea of writing a poem called What is Surrealism? And there's a great poem called What is Surrealism by André Breton. Basically, it's all the people who took part in his workshops. But anyway, what is surrealism? There's a challenge if anyone wants to accept it. Okay, thanks very much anyway for listening, and I hope you got something out of that and some thoughts on surrealism and some of the games you can play. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you so much, Matthew. That was unreal. You said at the very beginning the other word present in this one. Well, you brought that to us, and you also mentioned duality, which is so pertinent today because we have people from all over the world on our Zooms nowadays, and like we have Canadians and Americans on this particular one, and people from the UK as well as all over Ireland. So it's really, it was so imaginative and so exciting as well. It will open windows for us. I know we'll be talking about this in other groups. I know it.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Margaret.
Now, for anyone that would like to take part in the open mic, please put your names into the chat, and Lauren O'Donovan will facilitate it. So, and it doesn't have to be on the theme of surrealism, but if you have brought a surreal poem with you, all the better. So, Lauren.
Thanks, Margaret. You're the best. I'm just looking now. I think that Bryan was the first to sign up for the open mic. So, Bryan, if you want to kick us off, that would be great.
I thought Vayl put her name down before me, so Vayl should go first.
No, you can go first. Go ahead.
Oh.
Oh, yeah.
Vayl is such a sweetheart. Vayl is a sweetheart. I have to open for her because she's so amazing. So wait till you hear her poetry. Okay, bear with me 1 second. Is it just one poem?
You have up to 5 minutes, Bryan.
Oh, I do. Okay. So the first poem I wrote after the inaugural poem by God, I can't think of her name now, Gorman. And she had these earrings that Oprah had made for her of the caged bird, which represented Maya Angelou, who also did that. And this piece is called Why the Cage Therapy Patient Paints. I don't think René Magritte knew Maya Angelou from Adam or even Eve. She was only 9 when he painted The Therapist in 1937. The painting depicted the top half of a city man's body as a bird cage, partially covered with a blanket with 2 doves inside. Maybe he time traveled and landed in 1969 Harlem, wandered into a bookstore and heard a Black American woman's learned voice reading the book she wrote, speaking a truth in a way he had never heard a woman speak before. When he returned to 1937, he destroyed his time machine. He sat contemplating the future for at least an hour or two and realized women had minds of their own that were being wasted by being treated as second-class citizens and being married off. He realized his society caged women in, and in doing so, caged men in by happenstance. He felt caged in himself. Without realizing it, he had been to a psychotherapy session, and Maya Angelou was his therapist. And I'm trying to see what else I had for you. So these are pieces that I think are a bit surreal. The pyramid scheme that led to the Great Wall of China. I ascended the steps of Machu Picchu. I stood in the shadow of the sun god and absorbed all he had to offer into my being. I walked back down to earth and found myself ankle deep in Egyptian sand. During my stay in Giza, I entered a staring contest with a sphinx. He blinked first. He riddled me with riddles. I knew all the answers. The final answer was to get to the other side. The sky darkened, the stone-faced lion lit a fire. We made some s'mores. He noted I didn't char my marshmallows dark enough for his taste. Evening desert chill set in to keep me warm. The sphinx blanketed me from the neck down with his soft tail. I fell into a deep slumber. I awoke south of Masada. The Judean desert sun served as a beacon pointing to the 2-mile snake path. I traversed a narrow trail and noticed droplets of wax left by Israeli soldiers. I reached the top where the zealots resided, ruins surrounded by a crumbling wall. I climbed a stairway to a watchtower and passed out from the immense Israeli heat. I came to feeling dizzy and misplaced. A Chinese woman held a cold compress to my forehead. She helped me to my feet and led me out of the turret. I stood atop the Great Wall of China. The problem with such walls is the mere existence of their existence invites previously non-existent enemies whose sole purpose is invasion and destruction. People build walls inside their souls every day, sometimes to prevent eventual broken hearts, the same hearts they inadvertently pierce with sharp-edged trowels used to smooth mortar. These walls can be broken down, not by enemies, but by lovers and friends who tutor, trust, and possess a special epoxy for broken hearts. The walls cease being walls and are reborn as the complete souls their master masons had denied themselves. I stood atop the Great Wall of China. I wondered how long it would take to hike its distance. The answer doesn't matter, but the question tells the unintentional story of all such walls. In the end, the only worthwhile purpose of the Great Wall of China is as a tourist attraction its architects never imagined. And this is called Ribbons in the Quicksand. There once was a poet who separated from a jungle tour group. He wandered through the canopy underbrush for hours. He stopped to sit atop a felled tree the length of a bus. He thought this image would be a memorable line in a poem. He rose from his stoop, lifted his right leg to step on solid ground, and found his feet in quicksand. As a poet, he knew the true meaning of the word futility. He understood if he flailed his arms or tried to wriggle his legs free, he would sink quicker. His still body slowly sunk. When he was completely submerged, he opened his eyes to discover that he had sunk into a legendary mythological pool of words. He could breathe underwater and move freely in this verbal Atlantis. He started swimming a simple breaststroke. He noticed the words forming phrases as he pushed them out of the way and pulled them back in. He saw the words "no limitation" float before his eyes and started swimming the butterfly while completely underwater. At that moment, he was joined on his quest by a kaleidoscope of orange and black monarch butterflies, singing "Ribbons in the Sky" by Stevie Wonder, the song he always secretly hoped would be his first dance song at a wedding he had accepted might never happen. At the end of the song, the monarch swirled around and shrank into a tube that fell onto the ocean floor. It was retrieved by a shiny silver octopus who handed the poet an antique kaleidoscope and said, "Take a quick look-see. This one is different from the free cardboard kaleidoscopes your dentist handed out when you was a kid." When the poet wrapped his hand around it, it felt as if it had been custom made for him. He raised it to his right eye and experienced a poetic synesthesia of words as colors and sounds and aromas and tastes and textures. The kaleidoscope disintegrated and words swimming around his being flowed and rhymed and made sense and made no sense at all. He began to scream and cry and laugh and feel every emotion possible in one single moment. The tour leader placed a bar of smelling salts under the passed out tourist's nose. It seemed the man got lost and hit his head on a felled tree the length of a bus. The tourist, who happened to be a poet, thought his image might make for a memorable line in a poem. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Bryan. And thanks for warming up the mic. Vayl, I'm so sorry I missed you first, but really looking forward to your poem. Take it away.
No problem, thank you. Okay, I'll do a couple. These are kind of my inadvertently surrealist poems, so a couple of them. A dream about foxes. In the dark, carcasses hanging by their necks from the fence. I am asleep, but the red, green, blue of their entrails on the ground glistens like belief. Someone is speaking, and I strain to listen, but the drip, drip, drip of pooling fluids tightens around my head, blocking all other inconsequential sounds. The dream has its own language. It has the speech of little chittering insects and the whir of wings. It has the significance of decay. It transforms. Someone is speaking, but the tragic shreds of fur clinging to bone catch me, and again I am watching corpses make flowers. I think these were foxes before. In the dark, someone is speaking. The foxes are melting into the earth. The words of the dream sublimate, fox into flower, rot into loveliness. I am awake. And I'll do this one. This is a piece from a cycle of mine called Invincible Moments. They all have, it's a poem and it's followed by a little quote. So I'll do that. City on fire. We flew down the road at the speed of the music. We were high as eagles, chemicals coursing, and the laws of the world were unwieldy and tedious. We rebelled, boarding the currents to carry us onward. We revolted, revolving in space, time, and landscapes beyond. I saw ahead the skyline of the city, and it was stained with streaming red and arsenic flames, a conflagration massive as stars. You did not look up. One voice says, grasp tight to the rider, pale and promising, burn with the great fire. I almost caught his cloak. But then the second voice says, this too may be delusion. Lay back, wind to catch you. Sleep in the arms of this world as the old one ashes away. And he who was seated on the throne said, behold, I am making all things new. John of Patmos, Revelations 21:5. Thank you.
Thank you, Vayl. Thank you. And next up we have Cathal 1958.
Thank you very much.
Oh, I think we might have something technically wrong, unless I'm the only person who can't hear anything.